not to.
This is maybe the most I've ever agreed with you.
There we go. We're live now. Carter Rodriguez in the house for an awesome Saturday edition of the Garland Report. I guess depending on which side of this you're on. Celtics fans aren't happy coming out of last night. Actually surprised Carter, even given Porzingis' absence and Drew Holiday being out and those caveats. Pretty solid performance through the first 3 games for the Celtics against the Cavs, controlling a lot of those games. And I think most fans feeling pretty good about this matchup going into this. A lot of Celtics fans came out of this one. I don't know the right word to describe it. Not concerned, but angry about how the game went. And I understand it, right? You're up 25-3. The place is rocking. Tatum's going crazy. You have this chance to run away with this game and become prohibitive favorites in the East again. And the Cavs instead score this comeback victory. I mean, they got within a possession 5 minutes into the second quarter, and it's a game from that point on. Outscored the Celtics by about 30 for the rest of the game, give or take, and win the other way pretty decisively late in this one and tie the season series with this new look version of themselves. Get a good idea of how to go about beating the Celtics. I think they did a lot of good things in this one that we can get into. And as you know, Carter, we've done a million podcasts. I have so much respect for this Cavs team going back years now. So I've always looked at them as a viable, legitimate threat if things break the right way. But I still come out of this one feeling decently. Both teams at full strength about the Celtics' chances in this one. But there's no guarantee both these teams are at full strength come East Finals if it happens.
Yeah, it's a weird one where I went on a different podcast last night and kind of said that I think Cavs fans probably leave that game feeling better about their ability to beat the Celtics, but I don't know if Boston's going to feel that different. They maybe there's a little bit more respect, maybe a little bit more fear, but like I don't think Boston fans would be or should be in any kind of crisis about like, can we beat this Cavs team? Because I think, Justin and I have said after they picked up DeAndre Hunter at the trade deadline, there wasn't anything they could really do to be made favorites against the Boston Celtics in a series. And I still think that's the case. Doesn't mean there wasn't interesting stuff that came out of this game. And after Porzingis was announced out, Drew Holiday was announced out, I do think going in, I thought the game had lost a little luster, but there ended up being quite a bit to learn. Quite a few little tweaks on the road through this game that the Cavs made that I thought, were instructive as to how the series might play out in ways that they might be able to answer the call against this Boston team. The Cavs had not been able to generate good offense against the Celtics this season. Porzingis or not, it just was kind of immaterial. They didn't score well on them. And you going through the first 5 minutes of the game, and I'm texting Justin being like, yeah, they're in their heads. they can't score, whatever. Because it's not like Boston is the best defense in the league. They're a very good defense, but the Cavs have been a buzzsaw against a lot of very good defenses. And I was just kind of going into this game hoping to see them show some signs of life. So when you have 3 points through 5 minutes, you go, ruh-roh, Raggy. I guess they are just in their head against them. And then for the following 43 minutes, they put up a 144.6 offensive rating and basically get a bucket every single time they want to for the remainder of the game. So I do feel like that is probably the most meaningful takeaway for a Cavs fan that, hey, man, like we were able to get buckets against them when they were trying to lock it on us.
Yeah, and I have so many ways I could go here. I guess the first thing, the most obvious thing here is that all those things you mentioned, all the layers and intricate things that the Cavs did here to compete and win, just show that Kenny Atkinson's a viable match for Joe Mazzulla on the other side. And as you watch game in, game out this year, there aren't many. I mean, the big takeaway for all the Knicks fans last Sunday is that Tom Thibodeau is not a good enough match for Joe Mazzulla and Atkinson and some of these top teams in the East, as they've rolled through their season. You see a lot of old school coaches, maybe coaches who aren't on the cutting edge like these two are, that Mazzulla and I'm sure Atkinson through this great season that they've had here have completely taken advantage of, whether it's the shooting margins or the way they use the offensive rebounding and all of that down the line. Big stuff that factored into the Celtics championship a year ago. You look at this game, and you mentioned not being able to score on the Celtics before. They finally did that. They also haven't been able to stop the Celtics threes, even attempts. I know they've been great against other teams. They've really struggled with that against Boston. And in this game, they finally did it. They figured out a way with lineups and other things to actually win that three-point attempt battle. They matched the offensive rebounds. They win the free throw battle. And the way they went about getting free throws in this game, I thought was really impressive, just attacking different Celtics. And then the turnovers. Nobody's been able to force turnovers on the Celtics this year for the most part. And it's not like the Celtics had 20 here, but I think they had like 11-ish, and you win that battle. That's another win. That's another layer. That's another advantage you can steal against them, because the 3-point stuff becomes so daunting, even for the Cavs.
Yeah.
That you have to find other ways. You have to find other advantages, because
I think it's part of why the
have
Cavs
that.
I think it's part of why the Cavs have started games so tight is because they have not scored well in first quarters against Boston through this season series. And I think there is a degree of like, all right, guys, we got to play perfect on offense, because if not, the buzzsaw will get going and we'll fall behind. And it kind of becomes in my opinion, a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where they play tight, Boston plays loose, and Boston's gotten down to a 10-point lead in the first half of, I think, every single game of this series, even though the final score, the final series count ends up 2-2. So I do think I will push back a little bit on getting stops on this Boston team. Going into this game, they were holding the Celtics to 4 points worse than their season average offensive rating. Yeah, Boston was getting up threes, but I don't think they were. I think that Kenny's very switch-heavy scheme against Boston, even putting players like Darius Garland in the firing line by doing that scheme, has done a decent enough job of gumming up the Celtics machine. The risk you always court with that strategy is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are super good at basketball and super good at scoring against guys like Darius Garland. And like, you are going to risk them going nuts and then having to put 2 on the ball anyway and getting shredded, which was the first 5 minutes of this game. So I don't know. I will push back a little bit, because I think the switching has worked for this against this Boston team. Tatum is now, I want to say, 10 for 26 with Darius Garland as his primary defender, because I think Darius is doing such an amazing job. I think he's barely surviving out there at best, but because it's baiting Tatum into the worst shots. And I think my stat of the game, in terms of showing how that strategy has borne fruit for them, is 61 combined field goal attempts for Tatum and Brown.
You don't see that often.
That's a lot of switch and ISO. And that's not a lot of 2 on the ball, swing, corner 3, trailer 3, whatever it may be. I feel like they are consistently baiting Boston into offense that does not really benefit them. I mean, if you don't count that first 5 minutes, which, other than the play, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the show? But if you don't count that first 5 minutes, Boston only mustered at 112.3 offensive rating. They were not scoring at a Boston Celtics level for 43 minutes of this game. To me, I don't care how it looks. I don't care how many times Jaylen Brown puts his shoulder into Darius's chest and almost kills the guy because he just is not able to compete physically. If the end score is Boston averaging 112 points per 100 possessions, the Cavs have to be okay with that.
Yeah, and then it becomes a defensive game at that point. And the Celtics have been inconsistent enough defensively that you can catch them in a game or two there. And that's how I feel about this series. There's, between everything you account for here, and we'll get to all the wings and them being available, I think that was a great look for Cleveland in this game. Finally, they've had all those guys in their arsenal. And of course, can everyone just admit both teams have been missing guys? To some degree in these games, and
both these teams are super good even when they're missing guys, so it doesn't invalidate the result.
It's 2-2. It's 460 to 459, like I tweeted out earlier.
Crazy.
It's dead even. Both teams have missed guys. we get it. Maybe the Celtics guys have been a little better. I guess I'll give them that. But the Cavs' 2 wins have been rock solid, great stuff. And so much of it has been Mitchell, of course, because he's just going to do his thing, push them back into these games. Both are comebacks, double-digit comebacks where he's just going crazy. And that's a major component here. And I think that at the very least, if we're stacking up all these Cavs things that you have to consider for the Celtics, no lead safe because Mitchell's going to have that charge, that push. Hopefully for the Cavs' sake, he's healthy this time around because that
Can
was
I
a big
ask
factor
you?
last year.
I've been interested because Donovan's had some really rough games against elite perimeter defenders so far this season. Like Lou Dort has kind of famously put him in the torture chamber. Even in the game the Cavs won, Donovan had a really, really rough game. The Celtics team should be very good at guarding Donovan Mitchell. Like they have great perimeter guard defenders in Derek White and Drew Holiday. They've got great switchable, big, strong, athletic wings. They've got mobile, long defensive bigs that can protect the rim and switch. Why can't they guard Donovan? Because from my seat, I just can tell that the results are really, really good. But I feel like I see other teams make him work harder than Boston's had to make him work.
I think he gets ahead of steam at his best against them. And you mentioned some of the issues the Celtics had offensively and the shots they were being drawn into. So they had turnovers in this game. They had bad shots they took in this game that I think got him going out in transition. And when they let teams run and get out on the run, they haven't been great at defending that this year. So I think that's part of it. But they're also a team that likes to play back and take away the rim too. So he can go around his screens. He can find space. If he's able to beat one guy around a screen, it's probably not going to be another guy coming up to stop him there in the 3-point line. So a lot of it's that he's able to step in no shots and he's hit them. So yeah, I don't know necessarily what it is when it comes to comes to the Celtics specifically compared to other teams. But I will say, guys like him, quicker guards, more explosive guards, they've given the Celtics trouble, no matter the defenders in spots this year. And, when I'm thinking Detroit beat Boston pretty badly on Wednesday, guys were out. It was a back-to-back. It was a weird game. But they are the kind of team, the Pistons, that I look at and say, a lot of explosive guys off the dribble, a lot of guys that can create their own shot with speed, running. They ran like crazy in that game. Those are the 3 things that bother the Celtics. I don't look at the Cavs as that kind of team necessarily. They play a little bigger. They're not the fastest team I've ever seen. And they have a couple explosive guys, but it's like 1 or 2. So I don't look at them as that kind of team that's a big matchup issue for Boston. They're just so smart. And they play well. They play a good game plan. They have a lot of different guys that they can shuffle in and out here. And I want to ask what you thought about that because the rotations were just spinning throughout this game, like hockey lines of wings coming in and out of this one. And I expected that to be how the Cavs handle things, given that they have like 6 wings and none of them are perfect. So they just kind of have to try everybody here. But all of them made a decent impact. And I think if you include Jerome, they were able to generate 8 threes through those guys.
Well, yeah, I think Jerome. I'll hit on Jerome first before I get to the wings because he leads the team in plus minus. All 8 of his points come in the first half. He doesn't have like a box score popping game, but
it's nice to have your own Pritchard for this matchup.
I know he's been a complete. It was if you don't think Cavs fans were noting the plus 34 and minus 36 comparison in the 6th man of the year race between Jerome and Pritchard, you're fooling yourself. But yeah, I thought Jerome just really gave them a little bit of toughness. He calmed them down. He hit a couple ballsy shots. It's like, hey guys, we belong here. That kind of energy. And then on the other end, I do think it's a pretty good matchup for him. Just because he is not a very quick-footed defender. He's a steal merchant. He's a really good good passing lanes, and he'll challenge your dribble. But like when it comes to sliding his feet against like the Ja Morants of the world, pretty tough for him. He's just not that lateral of an athlete, but I do think this Boston team kind of presents a good matchup for him because Tatum and Brown would much rather go through you than around you. I feel like they're just so big and strong and physical. And if Jerome has one thing as a point guard, it's positional size. He's 6'5", he's got decently long arms, and he can be annoying, so he can hang in some of those matchups. And the Cavs don't have to play so small. And then on the other end of the floor, he can kind of plays at his own pace and doesn't get sped up. So the wing stuff, I thought what you really saw there was the ability to go small and not lose a ton of length. I mean, and this is where I think we lost the most intel and KP not being out there for you guys, in the sense that that's where Boston killed the Cavs in the last two meetings. Is Porzingis on the nail? He gets a switch, gets one of the guards on his hip, and then
He was
they've
great in
already
that last game
yeah,
before this one.
and they've already cleared Mobley or Allen, whoever the one big is out there, onto one of the guards because the Cavs are switching everything, and then it's George Niang protecting the rim. What's a lot different when your power forward is Dean Wade and your small forward is DeAndre Hunter. You're basically as big as you are in the double big lineup. It's just a little bit more democratized. And I think we got to see those lineups, and I thought they were really successful. There's a reason the Cavs bench pretty much won them this game alongside Donovan Mitchell. But I do think we saw a little bit of that optionality. And it also just allowed them, like, Jarrett, you're having an awful game. You're just going to have you go sit down. And that's something I don't think that they were smart to do in past matchups with Boston. Even when Jarrett was having a bad game, I still felt like he was no doubt your best option next to Evan, just so you could put up some semblance of a wall against this Celtics offense to keep Tatum and Brown from burying their way to the rim when they got a Darius or a Donovan on them. Now it's just a little bit easier to say, hey, Jared, it's not your night, brother. We're going to play DeAndre or Dean at the 4, and we're just going to be able to be big enough but play a different sort of way.
Yeah, and they have the option now. They've gotten healthier. They've made those additions. For Hunter specifically, I love the move, and as I think about it too, him coming in and replacing LeVert, who had some good moments for this team over the years, was among my Celtics killers when I made the list a couple of years ago. He's had some massive games against them, but a little banged up this year, missed some time, didn't quite fit into a team dynamic necessarily, more of an individual scorer in a way, at least how I look at him. Hunter, to me, not that he's a big playmaker or anything like that, but I think just fits into a role, a bench
They just
position,
didn't have it. They didn't have
complementary
this
piece.
archetype, you know?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they didn't have this archetype of a big 3-4 that was more scorer than role guy, you know? Dean could do that. Yeah, every year for the last 3 years, the Cavs fans have kind of looked around the room and been like, we really need Dean Wade, don't we? Like, we shouldn't need a guy this. We shouldn't.
He missed
need
the
that
first
guy
3 games,
this
right?
much. Yeah, he did.
Of this matchup.
And that's just consistently been the story where the Cavs record with Dean in the lineup has been really, really great. And I'm a big Dean fan, but if you're a little bit of a skeptic, you probably go, that's more that they just don't have anyone else that does that job. And now they do. And a guy with a much higher offensive ceiling than Dean. So the other thing that really factors in is you trade Karras and you trade George for DeAndre Hunter. But really what you do is you're trading Karras and George Niang for DeAndre Hunter and guaranteed rotational minutes for Ty Jerome. Because Ty was a guy who on some nights would play 7 minutes. Because Karras is a lead ball handler, a good scorer with better size and things like that. So it was hard for those two to find minutes together in a rotation unless you were just going to play really, really small and sacrifice a lot of physicality. So, Hunter's playing 3 more minutes than George Niang was playing right now per game. Now those numbers are a little skewed by the fact that they've kicked the snot out of everyone since Hunter's been traded for, so he hasn't had to play a lot of crunch time minutes. But really, all they did functionally was all of Karras' minutes go to Ty Jerome, all of George's minutes go to DeAndre Hunter, and that's just a better team. That's just a higher ceiling, higher floor team.
Yeah, I was surprised they were able to get Hunter for the price they did there. It was a great
You
move.
and me both, brother.
Probably the move of the deadline. And he's not a stopper by any means individually, but what you see from Cleveland in this game is they're going to run a team concept. They're going to zone it up. I find that interesting too. It drew the Celtics into some weirder lineups than they typically would go to down a couple guys because I think they're so obsessed with trying to beat that zone. And that ended up knocking them off their rhythm a little bit early, I think, when you're putting Torrey Craig out there and Drew Peterson out of nowhere, and you're just trying to figure out what your lineups are at that point. Both teams had a pretty long feeling out process in this game. And, once they both figured out what they were going to do, and it took the Cavs less time to do that than the Celtics. That set the tone for the rest of the game here. I do want to talk Celtics a little bit here, of course, but after we mentioned Prize Picks. Great time of year, end of this NBA season into March now, and some good stuff coming with March Madness too. It's another really fun time to be on Prize Picks, and I'll tell you about that later this month. But as you know, best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings. They've made daily fantasy sports accessible to all, and that's what it is, daily fantasy. Pick more or less on at least 2 players, that's your team, in their stat projections to shoot for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Play against your friends with 10 million users over there. They got the flex play, which is a great feature. You can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And they put their members first. So all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. I think Curry's going to get more than 5 threes. It's a good one for that Magic game. Giannis, 35 points. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this basketball season. When you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup with the code CLNS. That's $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup with the code CLNS. Prize Picks, run your game. So, Celtics here. It's not concern, but what we've learned this season is that they're vulnerable is not the right word, but there's competition out there. There's real threats to their ability to repeat, and there's multiple. You got to respect Cleveland. You got to respect Oklahoma City. Denver's in town tomorrow. We'll see how they look in that matchup first time with Jokic. So there's less room for error. And when you're down Porzingis, when you're down Holiday, who's been banged and bruised for a lot of this season, finger now, who knows how long that's going to sideline him. And then you're not getting depth contributions. And they've gotten it from Pritchard this year. They've gotten it from Hauser in spots, and he's dealing with the back injury there. He wasn't great in this game. And then Cornette, who's been awesome for about a month now, but wasn't a good fit in this game, this matchup. And really wasn't in the playoffs either when I think back to it. And then it's like Peterson, who's in the G League all year, and Craig, who just got here and hasn't done a ton. You don't want to play Kada. You don't want to play Bigger. You don't want to play Walsh. This is the scenario where I think you get worried if you're in a matchup with Cleveland. One guy's down, or maybe one guy's not himself, or someone's not playing up to their standard here. This is a thinner Celtics team I think we're seeing than a year ago, because they won all of these games down 1 or 2 guys last year.
Yeah, I feel like it was. I remember at the beginning of last year, my stupid self was like, I don't really believe in Boston because I think they got like 6 guys you can really trust, and like, is Pritchard really a player? Is Cornette someone you can really rely on? Is Hauser someone you can rely on? And in their case, all 3 of them were guys you could rely on. So I was just wrong about like those rotation players. A term I like to joke about on our podcast is pumpkin insurance. Like, you always need someone in case one of your role players in the playoffs turns into a pumpkin. Who can you go to next? And that can step up for you and help fill those minutes. And it does feel like Boston doesn't have as much of that this year, Now Pritchard just didn't have a good game. So like that obviously meaningfully changes the outcome if he's having a Peyton Pritchard style game. Cornette, who has had really good minutes against the Cavs this year, just did not have the best set of minutes after that initial, first quarter stretch. And they do have they just are a little creakier, Al Horford's old, so it's hard to count on him. He only had 4 shots in 38 minutes. I think that's a really like tough bellwether for his general, impact on the game. Even Hauser only gets up 8. Like, it just didn't feel like it felt like it had to be Brown and Tatum every single time down the floor. And that's part of what the Cavs scheme does, but also maybe it's a bit of the roster, maybe a bit of a chicken or egg situation.
Yeah, and I wonder what the deal is with Pritchard in a game like this. And I look back, I'm like, is this just a rough matchup for him? In the first game, he had 13, minus 14, but shot well. Second game, he's 7-16, shoots decently, 24 points. In the loss there that could have been a win, and there was no Derek White, no Brown in that game, so he filled in admirably for those guys. Third game, 3 of 7, all threes, 9 points, plus 19 in that one in the win, but not his best scoring night necessarily. I think when you look at the shot totals and just the role he has to play in these games, even on a night where you would have thought he'd be elevated a little bit because Holiday's out and he's playing more, he's more in an ancillary catch and shoot perimeter role in this matchup. And when he's at his best, he has the ball in his hands. He's probing, he's making stuff happen and creating his own shot. And for some reason or another, maybe just the way the Cavs are guarding him or the Celtics as a whole here, he's cast to the side a little bit. And if that's going to be what it looks like in a matchup like this, especially if he does have to step up and take on a bigger role with a guy out, that's tough because he's been so important to them this year in terms of sustaining runs into their second unit, making up for other second unit guys who aren't their best. I mean, he's been like there's a reason he's the sixth
He's
man
your
of the year.
sixth man of the year front runner.
Yeah, because he's filling in every single night for someone else not quite being themselves and not being there, period. And that's been so reliable for them. So I don't have concerns about him.
I got a question for you in this matchup, and you know Pritchard way better than me. But when I watch the Celtics play other teams, I feel like every time I notice Pritchard, it's he ripped someone or leaked out in transition, and he's the guy who's hitting the backbreaker trailer transition threes after the rest of the defense gets scrambled. Like, obviously he's a really good, lead guy too for them over the course of the season, but I feel like the backbreaker stuff comes in the steal pull up, 27-foot three that just, takes a 12-point lead to 15 and things like that. Does the fact that the Cavs don't turn the ball over, at least historically, they only had 7 turnovers in this game, how much does that just like limit him? Because the Cavs in their shell are just going to switch everything, and they don't really play any guys that can't guard Peyton Pritchard.
Right. And that's a good point. Even in your second unit, and there's probably many teams out there whose second units he can take advantage of. And this isn't one of those just because of the depth on that roster. So that's part of it. And then,
I remember Emmanuel. I remember it when we played the Knicks 2 years ago in that horrific series that they got, run off the floor. And Knicks fans were insanely high on Emmanuel quickly going into the series. And he didn't do anything against the Cavs, against a much more limited version of the Cavs. And I do think there is something to these backup guards who feast against, the middle and even upper tiers of the league. When you go up against this Cavs matchup, it just gets harder for them.
Yeah, I like your phrase pumpkin insurance there because I don't have concerns about him becoming a pumpkin, but have 3 games this year that are in the lower tier of his games, period, scoring wise and just overall effectiveness wise, coming against the Cavs. And I think it's less pumpkin and more there are bad matchups for him out there. And this looks like one of them. Not a horrible one, not that he can't do anything or can't play, but that was rough last night.
Yeah,
and
but if you need him on a night like last night where you need him to probably take 12, 13 shots and be a high volume player because, otherwise, the other outcome is 61 shots for your best 2 players, which even on the nights they were efficient, that's just a ton of usage for those guys to have to soak up. That's not like a super scalable strategy over a 7-game series. Like, yeah, I think that the second game we went like 6 of 17 or whatever. I'd almost rather see that than 2 of 4.
Now, on the other hand, Tatum out of this world in this one.
Unbelievable, man. And like, dude, I said that's what you risk when you switch everything, when you just say, hey, we're going to put Darius in the crosshairs and we're going to put Donovan in the crosshairs. But, in this game, I thought the biggest difference was the Cavs have 2 of the best switching bigs in the league, and Mobley and Allen, and he was eating those dudes alive. He turned the corner. He put an absolute nasty move on Allen at one point to just, waltz to the rim, and Horford, of course, had Evan Mobley walled off and was sealing him at the rim, so Tatum just got an easy layup for his trouble. I thought the complete package was really showing. I thought his rebounding was unbelievable. I think this was Tatum at his best because it was him being big, strong, physical dude. You know, as much as the Kobe disciple stuff gets him a lot of love, I think he's the scariest when he's just like, I'm getting all the way to the basket. I'm going
I
to
love when he plays power forward.
Yeah, and he played power forward last night, and it was really, really hard for the Cavs to stop.
3 blocks too. So
Yeah,
he has a
protected the rim
motor
really well.
defensively. Yeah, when he's really trying and it's a playoff intensity, and you could tell both teams took this game scheme wise, intensity wise, minutes wise. In Boston's case, you had some playoff level minutes from Boston in this one. They took this one seriously, and the crowd did too. There haven't been a lot of crowds that met the moment this year in Boston because coming off a championship, it's hard to have a game that feels like that kind of moment. But you're 6.5 games back of this Cavs team, and they're trying to come in and take that top spot. There is some sense of urgency there in the crowd. And you could feel that in this one too. And again, that start out of this world. Middle portion goes to Cleveland. The fourth foul on Jalen, he blamed it for the game and his finish and all that. Didn't like the calls. Felt like Cavs were flopping. But it was a real moment there. And regardless of what you feel about the calls, taking him out of the game for the final 7 minutes of the third there on Boston's end, just as a coaching decision there, took the air out of themselves a little bit, especially when you knew you didn't have the depth in this game.
Yeah, and you didn't have the shot creation. I think that's like the most dangerous thing for them is, they scored 42 points in the second half. And
what, 16 3-point attempts? I want to say
it wasn't much. That's for dang sure. The Cavs definitely got them out of their game going into that second half, and yeah, it was. I did think that was a major change in the game. I thought Jalen, in a lot of ways, outplayed Jason. Jason had the insane first half, but I thought Jalen was
hitting
the guy who
tough
scared
shots.
me. Jalen, I think, I don't know. Again, you know this team way better than I do. Jalen has the unbelievable ability to use his physicality to get that one step closer to the rim. So even when he's rising for a mid-ranger,
plays against Garland, I felt bad for Garland, man.
He's nasty.
What are we talking about? 60-pound difference there?
Yeah, I just feel like he plays really nasty. And the mid-range shot is a shot everyone wants to get, and he is rising for jumpers in the mid-range. But what he does so well, in my opinion, is he uses his physicality to take those shots from floater range. Yep. And when you're shooting, a 10-foot jumper, basically uncontested because he rises up so fast. I think it's his superpower. I think his number one offensive superpower is his ability to make contact, clear room, and then rise up for a jumper. And I mean, he's got to have the highest percentage of jumpers in the NBA where the opposing defender doesn't jump because he got up so fast.
He had a nasty up fake too on Mitchell that really stood out to me from the 3-point line. And that's not a big part of his game right now, but he just had it going so much in this game that he was in full control with those up fakes and other moments.
He scares the heck out of me. I think I would it's weird. I'd actually rather Tatum ISO Garland than Jalen.
Right.
And I don't know if Boston fans listening to this will roll their eyes at that, but because Tatum's obviously a better player, but Tatum I just think is easier to trick into stupid stuff at the end of the day. Jalen was just burying dudes. But also on his rim attacks, he was nasty in this game.
Yeah, and you missed him there in the third. I get you wanted him for the full fourth, but that ends up being a mistake on Joe's part. A slight win for Atkinson in this one, certainly in the coaching matchup for this game at least. Garland, though, if we're going to look at problems for the Cavs here, and there's many, especially when you're going up against Boston at full strength, Garland's a problem. And I don't know how they solve it other than that thing you talked about earlier, where if you don't have it or you're not fitting in this game, you're just not going to be on the court. And they went away from Allen in this one. And Garland was great late in the fourth. The 3 in the close game there that gave them a little bit of separation. And I think it was like a long 2 that basically iced the game there. So they roll with him after a rough start. He hits 2 big shots late and helps seal the game there. But 9 for 23. It felt like Boston's big plan in this one was to put Hauser on him and let him go at Hauser and have him take a lot of shots and just be inefficient out there against a taller guy. And it worked for a little while. And again, Cavs start shaking up lineups and getting guys in and out, and just having some flexibility there is what's going to help them with that. But he was not great in that playoff series last year when they really needed him. He has not been great.
He wasn't great in the entirety of the year last year. In fairness, I don't know if I would ascribe a ton of that to Boston and more. I mean, he wasn't getting his game off against almost anyone last year because he was just hurt and had a bad year.
So when you look at him in the match this year, let's see, it's so in this one you got the 9 for 23, you got the 3 for 21 in the first game.
That was the nightmare game. That was probably the worst game he's ever played as an offensive player.
You got 5 for 12 in the second one, and then you got 8 for 20 in the third one. It's not a good matchup for a very important player to the Cavs.
Here's what I'll say. And like, you're not going to like hearing this, and a lot of Cavs fans aren't going to like hearing this. So why is it not a good matchup? Everyone's going to say the defensive end of the floor. Well, Boston isn't scoring that well. Like, they're scoring below their season average. So, like, yes, I guess you could argue that if it was Ty Jerome out there, or you just played Donovan and Okoro and Hunter and Wade or whatever it may be, that those switches fare a little bit better. One, I would argue that if they did that, Donovan would just become the guy that gets hunted, and I don't think he's a significantly better defender than Darius in isolation. And then two, I just until I see Boston actually cooking the Cavs consistently on the offensive side of the floor, which again, they are playing worse than their league average against these Cleveland Cavaliers. At some point, Bobby, that's got to matter. And like, if I'm Kenny, that's the only thing I care about. I actually don't care if people look at Darius and go, "Oh, poor Darius, he's getting cooked out there." Because if it means that Boston takes 39 threes, I think the Cavs are cool with that. I'm actually more concerned with the offensive side of the ball, where I don't feel like he's gotten his game off very well. You know, he had the 8 of 20 game for 25 points. That was probably his best scoring game. I thought he had a nice playmaking game last night. He had 7 assists, the 1 turnover, and hit a couple clutch shots. But like, I do think he's got to be a guy who is putting up, 25 points on 17, 18 shots in order to make that defense swing worthwhile. But like, I don't know, man. I understand the optics of it, but Boston's not scoring that well. Like, doesn't that matter at the end of the day?
It does, especially if you're going to sacrifice him to get Boston out of its offense. And both teams were trying to do that to some degree, it looked like. And it's the Celtics defense that I think did a better job of getting him out of his game than Celtics players getting out of their game. I guess you can say they had the Celtics playing one-on-one, but Tatum and Brown scored 83 or whatever it was. So you didn't really slow them at all. So
yeah, no, he did not slow them down at all. Which, by the way, is the risk you court. Is like, sometimes those guys are gonna be great and they're gonna kill you. And so again, I get it. And by the way, I do think we saw one little thing. Here's a little X's and O's trend to keep an eye on, because for the first 3 games they soft switched everything. The second Garland's man came up to Tatum, it was just an immediate snap. We're gonna switch it. We're not gonna risk getting slipped and getting put in the Boston blender. We're just going to soft switch and try to keep our shell as strong as we can. And if they get to the rim, hopefully Allen or Mobley can get there and help. That's been the strategy. I felt like in the fourth quarter was the first time we saw the Cavs start fighting switches. And they short-circuited Boston like 3 or 4 times in that fourth quarter, not giving up the switch when Boston was expecting them to. And it was the first time they acknowledged, we would rather not get Darius onto Jalen or Jason right now. It wasn't like a hard hedge and recover, but it was more, DeAndre Hunter fighting hard through a Derek White screen or a Sam Hauser screen. And I thought that was one of the most interesting changes that I've seen. It's really the first time I've seen the Cavs actually amend their defensive strategy against the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and they have a lot of flexibility to do it now, which is nice if you're them. The depth is nice if you're dealing with injuries or something like that too. So yeah, impressive stuff from the Cavs here. I'll also throw in Mobley, who, as we've talked about for probably 2-3 years now, I've stressed that they're not gonna get where they need to go without him becoming this higher level offensive player. And I love that Atkinson's unlocked him at points this year, that he's taken the next step in that offensive growth. And you saw it at the start of the fourth there, which I thought was the most important stretch. Tatum's off the floor. He's out there commanding a ton of offensive responsibility inside and out. He's grabbing rebounds and running out and taking shots quickly in transition. He just had that monster 4-minute stretch that I felt like decided this game, along with 4 offensive rebounds in the fourth quarter as well. He actually doesn't end up playing for a lot of crunch time in this one because they're going smaller there. But at the beginning
I
of the
think
fourth,
Kenny was just trying to get him a blow, and Kenny is Kenny is from the Steve Kerr school, Bobby. You ain't playing 35 minutes unless I absolutely have to.
No, and it worked. So I loved what I saw from Mobley in this one. And, after the game, I'm in the locker room there and, just like asking about his belief in himself and all of that. Cause I feel like that's the biggest thing for him is to finally believe he can be that world breaking offensive player. Cause we know what he's capable of on defense. On offense, it just doesn't feel natural for him to take over all the time, especially with the guys who are around him. But they need him to be a threat. That's what it is. And he became a threat in that fourth quarter. And I love Mitchell in the locker room just hyping him up, saying this guy's gonna be one of the best players in the world. When Evan was talking, he went over to him and was like, top 5 player right here. And I feel like he needs that, and he needs these moments. To me, Carter, the only way the Cavs are gonna beat the Celtics in the playoffs this year is if Mobley has a monster series.
He has to be good. He has to be. Boston has gotten into his head a lot over the.
He has the fewest points per game in his career against the Celtics. The only team he has less than is Phoenix.
What is Mobley? What short circuits Mobley right now? It's long, strong wings who he can't bully, that can challenge his still developing dribble. It's gotten so much better, but he's still working on it. Check for Jason Tatum, and he has a hard time with bigs who have a ton of length, who give him some space and make him finish over them from floater range or with the jumper. Now that's why the jumper is so important. That's why, and then that's why the handle is so important for him as he continues to develop, because he's got to have them close out on him so he can then attack them with his length and with his handle. And so, I think Horford has just been kind of the perfect foil for him. Just this wily vet that just doesn't give him anything easy, doesn't let him get easy duck ins to get going. That's the stuff you don't see with Evan. Like, he'll still make some splash plays against this Boston team, but he gets 12 free buckets a game or 12 free points a game on just a smart cut from the baseline or a duck in and a seal, and gets a wide open layup. Boston just has not given him that, and so he's going to have to get harder points. He's going to have to earn it the hard way, and that's what I was so impressed about in the fourth quarter. It was, all right, hey, they're switching. Derek White's on me. I'm going to seal him deep in the paint. Tatum's not paying good attention. I'm going to run straight to the rim and get as deep of a seal as I can possibly get, so I can process my way to easier buckets. And then it's the hard stuff. It is the walking into a three on the left wing to basically give them the first lead of the game. So I just thought across the board he played a much tougher, more self-assured fourth quarter, and that's the Mobley they need if they want to beat this team. They might win 1 or 2 games with him playing being a helpful help defender and a connector and all that stuff. He's got to be a star. And I felt like he was a star in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and they still look back on that series last year as uncompetitive as it was for the most part because of the injuries. His emergence in that series was a big deal, and it flowed into this year. And I've been really impressed overall from what I've seen this year. It's just a consistency factor with him. He averaged, let's see, 21, 9, and 3 in that series last year against Boston. I know they after were like, oh, we like the Cavs shooting 2, so that was fine. But he was great. He took everything they gave him, and that's his job. So love where he's at. got to see it in the playoffs. Now, will these teams see each other in the playoffs? It feels inevitable. You look at the path now, Cavs all but secured one with this win with 20-something games to go, 7.5 games on Boston. So they're pretty locked in. You're talking about Orlando, Atlanta, Chicago, maybe a Brooklyn run here, but that doesn't look likely. So subpar teams there. You think you're going to get through that. Celtics, same deal. One of those teams. Miami, maybe. It feels like Detroit's less likely at this point. So both these teams are set for the first round. For the Celtics, second round, the New York thing feels fine for them. They've handled that team pretty comfortably this year.
I feel like you're dreaming that New York doesn't have some weird collapse and give the Bucks that 3 seed, because I feel like your team has their number.
Right, and it's 5.5 games there. You got to feel decent about that. They're winning games against teams that aren't the top teams in the league. So I think we're gonna, Lord willing, see Celtics Knicks this year, because it's been a while, and I love that little trip down to New York and MSG and all that. Bucks Pacers is what you're looking at if you're Cleveland. The Bucks would be
Wouldn't be thrilled. Would love someone to do that work for us.
Yeah, so that's where you look at this and say, could the Bucks supplant the Cavs and end up in that East Finals? Or the Pacers, they were there last year. They found a way to the East Finals, so you can't rule them out either. But it's the Bucks that
I think with the Bucks, it's the possibility of going into a series where if things break the way, in a bad way for you, they might have the 2 best players in the series. Because if Dame, I don't think Dame is better than Donovan Mitchell. I don't think Dame's better than Evan Mobley right now. But like, it could be for 6-7 games. Like, it's not beyond comprehension that could happen. And if that happens, then Cavs would be in for a dogfight. And like, part of me, it would be geeked to see that, because I want to see the Cavs be tested and have to, I would love a proper tune-up before you go play this Boston Goliath. But it's still a little scary. And like, I think the Cavs would be favored in that series. I think they should be favored in that series, but I think it's a harder road than Boston against the Knicks.
Yeah, definitely. And so if it does happen here, the way I look at it, full health, given what the Celtics look like when they're rolling with everybody rolling this year, that they could probably win this thing in 6, even against a fully loaded Cavs team. And, maybe something weird happens. It goes to 7 and it's in Cleveland. And, it's always daunting, but the Celtics are a great road team. And I'd feel good about them in a 7 against Cleveland too. An injury or two, though, the other way, and I do think the Cavs are more than equipped to be able to take advantage of that here. So that's where I'm still leaning through 4 games. I feel like for the bulk of this matchup so far, you've seen the Celtics dominate when they're more full for stretches. And then even when they're less full, that second game you almost win. Mitchell goes crazy and he steals it at the end. This game, you're in position to win and win decisively early on. So like, the longer stretches of this matchup, I feel like the Celtics own. Can the Cavs steal enough stretches and steal a game 2 or 3? They're probably gonna have to steal like 3 games with the Celtics at full strength here to be able to win this thing. So I don't worry about the Cavs. I just respect them right now.
I think, I think it kind of just depends on, do you think the first quarters are the most indicative of these two teams? Because the Celtics have handily controlled, and that's why I think the perception that, maybe it's a reality, I don't know. I think that's why there would be a perception that the Celtics have controlled this series, even though it ends up as a 2-2 split, because they got out to leads in all 4 games. Whereas the Cavs, they haven't had that luxury. They've constantly been playing from behind. They've gotten close in all 4. Like, all 4 games are competitive down to the wire. I mean, you mentioned that final point differential. You don't get that close without having 4 close games down the stretch in the fourth quarter. But the Cavs generally have been operating from behind. So I do think I would still give the edge to Boston in this series, but I think the Cavs can test them even when fully healthy, because Boston's fully healthy hasn't been that good. That starting 5 of Drew, White, Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis still has a negative net rating this year. They are, and that's like 300, 400 minutes in. They are still getting outscored with those 5 on the floor. And I think that their best is a little worse than it was last year. And I think their floor is a little lower than last year. And I think the Cavs' floor is much higher, presuming health. I don't think last season's matchup is indicative of much, but I do know that the Cavs ran Boston off the floor in one of those 5 games. And it wasn't like a Miami, that first round against Miami, where the Heat just shot an ungodly percentage from 3. The Cavs just straight up outplayed them. So I do think there are certain things, including the Donovan Mitchell factor, where they have had the best player through these 4 games. Donovan has outplayed Tatum. He has been the best guy on the floor through 4 games. And I do think that's got to matter. And it's just going to come down to, can the kids show up? Can Darius hang on the defensive end and still put together a good offensive game? And can Mobley play like he's played against the other, 28 teams? Or is he going to revert to, kind of the shell Mobley that we've seen at his worst in this season series? But I'm going to pick this to go 7 no matter what. I guess I'll still pick the Celtics, but I do think the home court thing really matters for Cleveland because they're going to have to win. I think Boston's absolutely going to steal one in Cleveland almost no matter what, which means that the Cavs, I'd rather the Cavs only have to steal 1 in the Garden as opposed to 2.
Yeah, both teams great on the road too. Cavs 22-6, Celtics 24-7. So that shouldn't be a problem for either of those in that spot. And I think that's why nobody's worried too much about the home court thing in either direction here. You just worry about what the Cavs have done. And to me, I know there have been some flukes in the regular season and stuff over the years, but I do like to believe that what you show over the course of a year matters. And the Cavs have continued to show that they're an elite team and that they have the profile of a team that could go to the finals. So I'm not going to sit there shocked in June if they're the ones playing in the finals, but I'm not expecting it right now, just based on what I've seen from the Celtics at their best. But
champs get credit. You get the championship bonus, and
right,
that's
you
why
get the
I think
benefit of the
everyone's
doubt.
going to be picking Boston.
Yeah, there's just been a lot of bumps and injuries and this and that throughout the year that make you say, if that stuff happens in a big spot, you're a little more vulnerable there. But at full strength, and the Porzingis thing's big in this matchup. He was so great in that last game there, especially. That could swing things in a massive way. And then Drew's defensive flexibility there was sorely missed as well. So those were 2 key guys missing there. But the Cavs still impressive win coming down 22 to win this one late. Best part of this series, if it does happen too, like it's not all about who's better and this and that. There's just so much flexibility and coaching wrinkles and stuff here that a lot of it's just going to be how these 2 teams use these rosters rather than who's playing the best or who's better than who in this. And, it was just a really interesting game to talk about too, Carter. So I was really excited to get on here and talk about it and break it down. It was the best game by miles covering the Celtics this year to watch this year. The energy was in there, was just insane. So you just hope it ends up happening. That's all you're hoping for at this point.
Yeah, I would feel a little sad if I didn't get I'll be happy if the Celtics somehow lose before the Cavs play them. But I'll also have a little bit of melancholy because I do think this is the toughest matchup for the Cavs in the league, tougher than the Thunder. And I want to see how they rise to the challenge or fall. It's the challenge. It's all good data at the end of the day.
Yep, and if it happens, it'll be in late May at this point. So Celtics Cavs tie the season series 2-2, almost even on the scoreboard as well. Pretty crazy there. And he's Carter Rodriguez. He'll have the rest of the Cavs season covered along with our good friend Justin Rowan over on the Chase Down podcast. So check them out. We have Celtics Nuggets over here tomorrow, 1:00 Eastern. So a nice early start. Less than 24 hours from now in Boston. Another elite opponent to come in. Jokic missed that first game earlier this season between those 2 teams. So they'll get a look at him. Jamal Murray playing out of this world right now in February. And now we have March starting up. And it's a stretch run, 20 games each, give or take, for these teams here to go until we're in the playoffs. And you can already see the standings and matchups and all that starting to take shape. So thanks, Carter. We'll talk to you probably sometime this spring, hopefully, and enjoy the rest of the year, man.
Thank you, brother.